unthinkable just happened. Keir Starmer didn't get attacked by the British media. He wasn't grilled by the opposition in the Commons. He wasn't ambushed in a TV interview. He was dismantled calmly, coldly and publicly by Donald Trump on the world stage. And the worst part for Downing Street, there was no shouting, no insults, no drama, just numbers, brutal, undeniable numbers, because while Starmer has been telling the British public that energy prices are coming down, that relief is on the way and that the long-term plan is working, Donald Trump stood up at the World Economic Forum in Davos and quietly blew that entire narrative apart. And once you hear what he said, you'll understand why the silence from number 10 suddenly feels deafening. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. If you care about what's really happening in British politics, behind the headlines, beyond the spin, then please take just 1 second to like this video and subscribe to the Britain Daily. It's completely free and it helps us keep bringing you the hard-hitting stories that matter. Trump looked directly at Europe and straight through Britain's excuses. Then he dropped a statistic that should have sent shockwaves through Westminster. He said the United Kingdom now produces just 1/3 of the total energy it generated in 1999. 1/3, let that sink in. A country sitting on top of the North Sea, one of the richest energy reserves in the world, now produces only a fraction of what it once did. And Trump didn't frame it as a complicated economic puzzle. He framed it as a simple, devastating question. How does a country with that much energy beneath its feet end up with some of the highest energy prices in the developed world? According to Trump, the answer wasn't geology, it wasn't bad luck. And it certainly wasn't because the resources were gone. It was policy. He pointed out that companies are being driven away from drilling in the North Sea because the government takes such a massive share of the revenue that the projects simply don't make sense anymore. His claim, up to 92% of the revenue is taken through taxes and levies. So what happens? Energy firms walk away. Production drops, supply tightens, prices climb. And who pays the difference? Not the politicians, not the policymakers, British families, British businesses, British industry. Then Trump delivered a line that cut right through the entire green energy narrative, dominating much of European politics. Keir Starmer's energy narrative was publicly challenged on the world stage. The numbers had been laid out, the comparisons had been made. But what came next was even more unsettling for Downing Street because Donald Trump didn't stop at energy prices. He turned the conversation into something much bigger: security, industry, and Britain's future place in the world. Standing in front of global leaders at Davos, Trump didn't deliver a fiery speech. He delivered a warning. And it was aimed squarely at countries like the United Kingdom. He argued that nations which abandon domestic energy production don't just weaken their economies, they weaken their sovereignty. Because if you don't produce your own energy, someone else will. And when that happens, you don't just import fuel. You import leverage, you import dependence, you import vulnerability. For Britain, that argument cuts deep. Once upon a time, the UK was an energy powerhouse. North Sea oil and gas turned the country into a net exporter. Industry thrived. Energy was a strategic asset, but today the picture is very different. Production has declined. Imports have risen. And energy bills remain among the highest in the developed world. Trump's message was simple, but devastating. A nation that can't power itself, can't protect itself. And that's when he shifted to a comparison that made the contrast even sharper. He spoke about the United States, how it had moved to become energy dominant again, how it expanded domestic drilling, how it reduced reliance on foreign suppliers. And the result? Lower energy costs, more industrial investment, factories returning, jobs created. Trump painted a picture of energy not as a burden, but as an advantage, a tool to rebuild national strength. Then, without raising his voice, he implied that Europe, and Britain in particular, had chosen the opposite path. More restrictions, higher taxes, less drilling, more dependence. And the consequences, he suggested, were already visible. High electricity costs pushing companies overseas, manufacturing shrinking, investment heading toward countries with cheaper, more reliable energy. In that moment, the debate stopped being about wind farms or carbon targets. It became about economic survival. Because if factories leave, they don't just take jobs with them. They take skills, they take supply chains, they take long-term growth. And once that industrial base is gone, it's incredibly hard to bring it back. Trump's warning wasn't framed as an attack on Britain. It was framed as a prediction. A country that prices itself out of energy independence risks pricing itself out of global relevance. For a government already facing questions about growth, living costs and industrial strategy, that message couldn't have come at a worse time, because it wasn't coming from the opposition, it wasn't coming from a think tank, it wasn't even coming from the British media, it was coming from the most influential political figure in the United States on one of the biggest global stages. And that meant one thing. The conversation about Britain's energy future was no longer just domestic. It had become international, it had become strategic, and it had become unavoidable. By the time the dust settled from Davos, the shockwaves were already reaching Westminster. Because Trump's warning hadn't just made headlines, it had reignited a debate that had been quietly simmering beneath the surface of British politics, energy, costs, and the future of the country's economy. Inside Parliament, the question began to echo louder than ever. If the United States can drive down prices while boosting production, why can't Britain? Opposition MPs wasted no time. They pointed to the stark comparison Trump had laid out. Cheaper power across the Atlantic, more drilling, more industrial growth. Meanwhile, in Britain, rising bills, factories under pressure, and constant warnings about competitiveness. The argument was simple, but politically explosive. Is Britain sacrificing its economic strength in pursuit of climate targets that other nations are quietly stepping away from? For Keir Starmer's government, this is where the real challenge begins, because the energy transition isn't just a policy, it's one of the central pillars of Labour's economic vision. They've promised massive investment in renewables, a shift away from fossil fuels and a future built on clean, green growth. But critics say the transition is happening too fast and at too high a cost. They argue that shutting down domestic oil and gas without secure, affordable alternatives only increases reliance on imports. And imported energy, as Trump warned, comes with strings attached. Higher prices, geopolitical risks, and less control over your own future. That argument is starting to resonate, especially as industries begin sounding the alarm. Manufacturers are warning about electricity costs. Heavy industries say they're struggling to compete with rivals in countries with cheaper power. Some companies are already looking abroad. And when businesses start leaving, it becomes a political problem very quickly. Because energy policy isn't just about carbon targets, it's about jobs. It's about wages. It's about whether Britain remains an industrial nation or becomes a service economy increasingly dependent on imports. That's the dilemma now facing Starmer. If Labour doubles down on its green transition, critics will say it's ignoring the warning signs. But if it slows down or reopens the door to more domestic drilling, it risks angering environmental groups and parts of its own voter base. It's a tightrope, and Trump's intervention has made that tightrope even narrower, because now the comparison is out there in the open. America, cheaper energy, stronger industry. Britain, higher costs, uncertain growth. Whether that comparison is entirely fair or not almost doesn't matter politically. Perception is everything. And the perception right now is that Britain's energy strategy is under scrutiny on the world stage. As the debate intensifies, one question is beginning to dominate the political conversation. Will Britain's green transition deliver prosperity or push industry and investment elsewhere? Because the answer to that question could shape the next election and the country's economic future for decades to come. If you want more high-impact political analysis and dramatic breakdowns like this, make sure to like, share and subscribe to Britain Daily. Thanks for watching.